Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, thank you very much for speaking with the Institute for Societal Leadership. We're going to start with your career in MFA because the bulk of your career has been in the Foreign Service. So, if you don't mind me asking, why did you decide to go into the Foreign Service?
Well, when I was in law school at the then University of Singapore, there were 147 of us. It is, until today, one of the largest group of law graduates. So halfway through law school, I was asked to attend a career talk by some guy from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore. And I was quite impressed. So from third year onwards in law school, I decided to look at international issues. I realized that the Foreign Service, as they call it, utilizes a lot of the analytical training that we do in law school. And give of the gap is also value in the Foreign Service in dealing with foreign diplomats and other countries around the world. So I said, okay, if I feel that I should look at a non-legal career, MFA would be a good choice. Actually, the other push factor is really that looking at 147 of us, we say, wow, it will be very competitive. And deep in my heart, I have this issue of how to go and fight with my own classmates. I was the sort of the class monitor for all the 4 years in the law school, and I got quite fond of all my classmates. And my challenge was, if I have to fight with another classmate for one job in a law firm, most likely I will just give it to the person. So I said.
So you're a softy at heart, huh?
Yeah, I think so. That's what my wife said. But it was also quite lucky that year when I came out after graduation. I applied for a job in the Foreign Ministry. I also applied for a job in Singapore Airlines, and I applied for a job in one of the law firms. And when I opened the letterbox, it was the same day I got all 3 replies, and it was all acceptance. And then I did a very Singaporean thing: how much are they paying me? And Ministry of Foreign Affairs was paying me the most because it took into account my national service years. So okay, I said to my wife, then my girlfriend, I said, maybe this is where I should go. We try for 3-4 years, and if I don't like it, I will come back and join the legal service, legal practice. So that's how I got into Foreign Ministry.
So you enjoyed it?
Yes, but I also tell you, the Foreign Minister at that time was S. Rajaratnam, but the Foreign Secretary, Permanent Secretary Foreign Affairs, was S.R. Nathan. And he did a very clever thing, which I feel until today had a strong impact on my life and the rest of my cohort. He decided that we should develop what he called area specialty. So there can be Arab studies specialists, there can be Southeast Asian studies specialists, there can be Chinese studies specialists, and so on and so forth. And he basically assessed all of us, and more than 3/4 of us were put on this area specialization program. What he did was 2 or 3 of us could go out 1 year to do our master's degree, specializing in the designated area studies.
Did you have a choice in picking your specialization?
I did not have a choice because they offered me to do Arab studies, and when I look at it, I say, why me as a foreign, why me on Arab studies? And they say, well, you pass this test that we did on language identification, and in spite of all the strange sounds from the Arabic language, you came out on top of it. So, okay. And I look at the scenario. At that point in time, there was no one in Arab studies or interested in the Middle East. Therefore, I said, okay, let's do it. And I end up in Georgetown University doing my master's degree on Arab studies for 2 years. I crammed 3 years of Arabic study in the 2 years of master degree at Georgetown University. So it was quite tough, first year in particular, but by the end of my first academic year, I got a hang of it. So went along quite okay. The main problem, of course, was the Arabic language, which to us non-speaker is a completely different world. At that point in time, to pass the exam, and we were tested by the people from the US State Department, not from the university. We had to pass the level of competency required of the American diplomats. So, okay, I guess what you call it, you cram and pass your exam. Yeah. So that's how we struggled through. My wife was with me at the time, and we really had to work very hard.
You mentioned that one of the influential factors in your career was S. Rajaratnam and S. R. Nathan. How was it like working for them?
For Mr. Rajaratnam, it was very straightforward. He has some ideas, he throw it at you, you should grasp it quickly and go with him, with the flow. He was very learned, he read a lot, he had very passionate ideas about the world at that time, was very anti-communist, anti-Soviet Union in his own ways. So he would do most of his own reading, he crafted his own speech most of the time. But as a foreign minister, you had to deal with foreign visitors.
Right.
Therefore, you are required to take note of whatever transpired during the meeting and to be accurate in a certain way, also very concise. And you do this on your own, you know, because he would not be bothered to read the record that you filed. So we had to write it out clearly, succinctly, and pass it to our immediate supervisor, who would normally not be there in the meeting. So you have to be very alert and follow the discussion and be accurate. And if you come across anything that you are not familiar, you should go and ask the respective desk officer in the ministry, hey, the minister talk about Bosnia-Herzegovina, what is it all about? And you get some ideas, and then you try to compare the notes that you recorded to see whether it makes sense to put it together in a paragraph. So it was very good training as far as I remember, because Mr. Rajaratnam did not bother to look at his notes of conversation or recording of all these interactions. He just assumed you are competent, you will write well, and you document it for the sake of the bureaucracy, the ministry record.
Yes, that's something you appreciated.
Yeah. I think we very often, because he was such a globalist, he looked at everything with the international dimension, and he had always the strategic angle. So you learn a lot listening to him, talking to the foreign dignitary. When we traveled with him, he was the easiest of bosses to look after. He would just do the protocol thing as we require him to do. The rest of the time, he would be sitting down writing his own diary and whatnot. Right. So from very early in my time at the foreign ministry, I learned to be self-reliant, to be precise, to be accurate. And on top of that, we have Permanent Secretary S. R. Nathan, who was very sharp and had what we call elephant memory, could remember everything he asked you, and we shy away from seeing him on the corridor, because whenever he catch you anywhere in the building, he would say, hey, you know, Keng Yong, do this for me. I read something the other day. What was it about? Oh, then we had to go and follow up on this. So he was very instrumental in keeping all of us on the ball, so to speak. And as I mentioned earlier, he was very concerned about the institutionalization of the foreign ministry. So he developed this concept of area specialization. At the same time, when we were asked to do this, he would give us what we call ECA, extracurricular activities. So my job in the beginning was to focus on the Middle East and the third world country, and eventually I went to do Arab studies. But my extra reading, I am the resource person for nuclear and disarmament issues. I always felt afraid to go to Mr. Nathan, and he would say, now tell me, what's this technical term in the disarmament document, blah, blah, blah. And then most of that area happened in Vienna and at the UN. So unwittingly, we also had to read a lot about UN work and whatnot. So that's how he trained the Foreign Service officer. He was fussy about our recording, our writing. He would like to give us specialized training. And once you are given that specialty, you should be familiar with all that, and you are the resource person for the ministry for that area. Then thirdly, he will make sure that you are not boxed into one subject or one technical area. He give you extracurricular activity to do. But after a while, it became a real challenger to keep up with it, because he would make you stay on your toes by asking you a question or pose a comment for you to follow up whenever he see you in the ministry, or when he reads something and he would write down a short note for you, or the so-called resource person to go and find an explanation to him as to why people said this or what is this concept about. So that way we got a very broad, multifaceted training.
Okay, what about Singapore's role in ASEAN, or strategic position? When ASEAN was founded, what was its strategic position, and has it changed since?
The wonderful thing about Singapore diplomacy is that we are very consistent. I think we got very good foundation. When we got into ASEAN, we know that ASEAN has certain limitation, but ASEAN can serve Singapore interests in certain other ways. And we have never, up to today, got carried away by the highs or the lows of ASEAN. So, to put it differently, we are realistic about ASEAN. Where it can help us, we would go full steam, but we know the extent in which the ASEAN vehicle can serve our interests. The ASEAN mechanism help us to overcome the small size of Singapore, and at a certain time it also enable us to do more than what we alone can do. The selling point about ASEAN to many of the ASEAN audiences out there has always been that working as 10 ASEAN members is better than working individually or small group of 2 or 3 countries. ASEAN has helped us in 2 ways. One, we are now a big trading country. In fact, Singapore has always been the top 20 of the world trading countries. So how do we keep the market open? How do we get other countries which may be too inward-looking to be more open to trade and other flow of investments and skilled personnel? Through ASEAN, we were able to articulate the benefit and the advantages of keeping free trade, free market.
So does the AEC help?
It does help. You know, people forget that the AEC originated from one period in history which was very threatening to our own survival. This was in the year 1997, 1999. We had the 1997, 1998 Asian financial crisis, the Tom Yum crisis as we call it, because of the collapse of the baht and other currencies in the region. Yeah. And as a result of that, people in the capital-rich countries were wary about Southeast Asia. Yeah. And foreign direct investment declined. And as a result of the lousy economic condition, people started to look at all the bad things about Southeast Asia and put those bad things on top. So what the ASEAN ministers did was to rally together, and we did quite a few things, including engaging big American consultancy like McKinsey and Company to do competitiveness study, to do things that will help refocus the investors' interest in Southeast Asia. So AEC came from there, because when we study the competitiveness of ASEAN, at that time, much of the FDI was being diverted to China, to even India, and at one point to even Middle Eastern countries such as Egypt and all that, because when you think about producing consumer goods, you go to those countries with certain advantages. And after the Tom Yum crisis, as we call it, those guys with money would go to all these places. So we need to bring people back into Southeast Asia. And using the ASEAN vehicle, we were able to persuade investors to take a second look at Southeast Asia with the size of the market and the potential of the middle class and whatnot. So overall, this ASEAN was the basis to construct an AEC, ASEAN Economic Community. Without ASEAN, how can we construct an AEC? Yeah. The problem, I think, is that our ASEAN leadership did not spend enough time articulating the difference between an ASEAN Economic Community and the European Union. At that time, they were called the European Economic Community. Yeah. People minimize this issue of supranationality in Europe because they think that by integrating all the European economy and not playing up on nationalism, Europe can grow much faster. But in the case of Southeast Asia, we were all very young countries, and you tell people to pull together their sovereignty advantages, people look at you with aghast and unaccepting looks, because we all want to be our own country and look after our own national interests. So the leaders could have done more to explain that what ASEAN was doing is to form a community which pull together our strength, develop regional initiative which will help our own national development, our own national reform. We don't have a thing called a European Commission that imposes specific supranational policy which everybody must follow regardless of whether you are capable or not. We still rely on regional ideas and then leave it to the national authority to follow up. We are actually just using some of this community idea from Europe to help us facilitate the ASEAN 10 coming together. And we are still very much an intergovernmental body. We are not a supranational body. And given the fact that we were all young nation state, the ability for all 10 of us to come together in this manner actually is a significant achievement. We still have suspicion and mistrust of one another, but when we have a regional challenge, something that will hit all of us, like for example, at that time, the financial crisis, we all come together, work together. Now, these days, we have South China Sea, ASEAN, may be maligned by all these ineffective statements and whatnot, but the fact is that we still stay together. And to the other side, the Chinese diplomacy, they look at us as ASEAN. No? They try their best to divide and rule, but still, more or less, we stay together as ASEAN. And for the Americans, for the Japanese, for the Australian and Indians, they see us as ASEAN, and they believe that it's useful to continue to engage us, do things with us. Hopefully, can be a bulwark against the Chinese expansion, but they also know that we don't want to take sides. So, overall, the net result is active engagement of our Southeast Asian countries. Where there is an advantage for Southeast Asia to grow with, say, India or with Japan, we ride on it. Then we have the US still engaged in this region. And much as we don't like to say so in public, all of us in ASEAN believe that this idea of balance of power in Southeast Asia is actually a doable and actually a good concept for ASEAN future. Of course, Indonesia, as the biggest country in ASEAN and very committed to non-aligned, would like to think that non-alignment is still the best way to go. But in reality, that may be something more difficult to achieve. So overall, ASEAN has given us a platform to practice all this thing called balance of power, avoiding taking sides, engaging all the major powers in a more or less manageable manner. And as we do all this, the Western investors, the big companies, would say, okay, we can still go to Southeast Asia to do business. After all, they got such a big market. And if the ASEAN country knows how to deal with all these challenges facing them with regard to relationship with the big powers, okay lah, we can go. And that's where we are today. So it's very unfortunate that people don't look at this in the historical context, in the bigger picture, and they just assume that it's a given. Big country will come here to look for friends. Big company will come here to look for business opportunity. It's all a big sales pitch, if you like. With ASEAN, we had a very wonderful thing in today's language is a USP, unique selling proposition. Without ASEAN, why would the big company come? You can say we have oil and gas, so what? Oil and gas is much easy to buy and do in the Middle East and in Russia. Why should I come to Southeast Asia? Oh, we have 600 million people. I also can go to some other places like India or China. Why I need to pay attention to Southeast Asia? But we say, oh, no, you are passing through our sea lanes of communication. Trading is done extensively between the East and West, and you need shipping to go through, you need airline to go through. So here we are. We give you good predictability. When it's necessary, we talk about the connectivity. And when it's really hard-pressed, we talk about the rule of law. All these things help to bring people to Southeast Asia. And the progress that we achieve today in terms of general prosperity, in terms of Southeast Asia being in the mindset of people around the world.
What is the secret to ASEAN staying together? Because like you said, historically, there have been regional differences.
The secret really is that all of us in our respective country know that by ourselves, we cannot manage this big portfolio of transaction. To put it in very business-oriented terms, it is such a big business managing Southeast Asia. So how do we deal with it? Using one bank to manage this big portfolio of investment or this equity, not possible. So we have different bankers to help us. And where possible, we tell our bankers to converge their resources to help us manage this big amount of transaction. Maybe I should say also that at the end of the day, Southeast Asian leaders quibble with one another. Southeast Asian nations, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, nag at each other, look at each other with envy from time to time, and get mad with one another. But all the leaders so far, at least from my close observation in 5 years as Secretary-General of ASEAN, they finally come to one basic point, which is that strategically, we must engage each other and hang on together. Because if we don't hang on together, we will be hung by whatever lousy transaction out there, lousy term or events out there, and being played out by all the other big boys in their own respective great games and diplomatic maneuvers. So the good thing about Southeast Asia, about ASEAN, is that ultimately we have a certain quality of leadership. Not many people know about this, not many people talk about this, but I think history will show that, generally speaking, as a region, the quality of our leaders is not bad. You may have idiotic people in some of the ASEAN countries, but when they come together and they sit together as ASEAN leader in a summit, as Secretary General, I sit in 5 years of this kind of thing. They talk to each other very sensibly, and as politicians, they all are political leaders. They are not the sergeant major from the army who become president of a country by a coup d'etat. They are all very clever.
There were some.
Yeah, but even in those kind of contexts, they quickly learn the trick of the trade by the socialization as ASEAN 10. I used to remember the Vietnamese and the Laotian leaders. They talk very little in ASEAN meeting. But by the time I left after 5 years, the Vietnamese Prime Minister was very confident. The Laotian Prime Minister was more talkative, because every time they come for ASEAN summit, there is the rigmarole of protocol, meeting, speeches, and the ASEAN way. Either we play golf or we sing karaoke. You basically socialize these guys to a diplomatic quality that make them feel more and more confident of themselves. This element has not been thoroughly studied, but when I discuss it with my predecessor as Secretary General and my successor as Secretary General, we feel that this is a very important dimension of ASEAN that people don't really attach enough importance and value.
So the ASEAN way is more a boon than a bane?
Yeah, definitely. It cannot be said to be exactly one way or the other, but overall it helps. So when we say there is non-interference, we go back to this basic concept. You run your own household, you run your own house decor, you do things in your own garden. Your neighbor next door, if you live in a semi-detached house, would have a lot of say, but still he cannot come and tell you to say, I don't like the way you cultivate your garden, or I don't like the way you arrange your furniture in your living room. He can contribute ideas, and you say, okay, this seems a good idea, but your neighbor cannot come and tell you, rearrange this. The other thing that I always put across is that people make a big deal about ASEAN having this non-intervention policy. But is that so unique to ASEAN, to Southeast Asia? Everywhere around the world they do that. Even in today's Europe, the Spanish don't like the way the French tell them what to do at the border, vice versa. So that is not unique. And people make a big deal out of this because they think that this seems to be one punchline that they can deliver against ASEAN. Secondly, when you look through what we are doing in ASEAN these days, when we say we have this non-intervention principle, it's not correct to say we are so precise. We have, through the years, started to refine our own rule about this. We may not tell you how to rearrange the furniture in your living room, but you, after a while, say, I'm getting stale of this. Maybe I ask my neighbor, what do you do? So from 2004, 2005, the Indonesian authority started to talk about Aceh and the then independent movement of Aceh, and briefed the ASEAN leaders from the other country about what is happening in Aceh. As a result of that, the Filipinos started to talk about Southern Mindanao to the other ASEAN leaders and explain why is it such an intractable problem, the Muslim and the Christian relationship in Southern Philippines. And in 2006, Thaksin, before he was deposed, decided to say, okay, since all of you are prepared to talk a little bit about your own domestic issues, I want to tell you why I'm not happy you talking about Southern Thailand. But now I understand that your starting point on this issue is here, in this manner. Let me explain to you my position. So over time, you notice that the respective countries with all these kind of tricky, intractable issues have started to share their respective approaches and their respective concern with the other countries. And this is how we think in ASEAN we overcome the isolation of Myanmar. We had a hard time with the rest of the world. But because of the ASEAN socialization at the leadership level I talked about just now, and because of our constant harping on the need to look at our own house and how can we as responsible members help each other, I believe that the Myanmar leadership could see for themselves the ability for them to continue the way they are, the way they were. So, as I explained to my Western scholar friends, I say that we cannot claim credit for what happened in Myanmar, but we definitely can claim credit for being able to stand up to the demand of the world to force the Myanmar guy to change overnight. And maybe if we had done that, there might be a different situation now in Myanmar. We never know, because we are tinkering with 17, 18, 20 different communities. Until today, they haven't even sorted out. So, final point is that ASEAN is quite unique. We have done it the organic way, in my opinion, typically Southeast Asian. We have taken in the extraneous issues, the external ideas, and we try to cook it in a manner that we can have a nice, delicious dish. It may not be the end of our problem, but at least what we can say to each other is that we have overcome a lot of difficulty together, and we should not easily give up in the face of new challenges that we have. Today we have to deal with issues like terrorism and religion and radicalization of groups within our own society, because we are so multicultural, multi-religious. But if we look at how we had tackled some of these previous difficult political and geopolitical issues, I think we have a certain way. It is not the only formula, but we can at least minimize the potential for dramatic outbreak of violence or war between states.
Right. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Sabrina.